First up on the chopping block is Hizashi. I initially started out by creating silhouettes, combining Japanese and English fashion and setting a few ground rules with his general design, making it more practical for the forest and having some traditional cultural aspects. Before Hizashi escaped to Greendale, he was a farmer. Farmers in the 15th to 17th century wore kusades, a small sleeved robe that was originally worn as an undergarment by the elite. I had a big play with this, even adding a large jacket over the top. Along the way, I kept adding more and more details, such as waraj sandals woven from rice straw for daily tasks and long journeys. Going back to the jacket, it gave me more opportunities to explore different types of fabric seen in this era, as well as different patterns and stitching methods. For example, I wanted to include shishiko stitching. This was to make thin fabrics last a lot longer and was mostly used by commoners. It reinforced worn areas and provided extra warmth by quilting layers together, which is why this jacket made a lot of sense to me. Compared to the other few designs I did make, one leans very heavily into the more Japanese style, which I would have loved to see for Hizashi earlier in the story if I made a prequel to the events that happen and everything that goes on, having a small flashback into what his life was like. My only reason why I won't have this as Hizashi's main design is because he is technically a fugitive, saying outright with his clothing that he is from Japan, full well with everyone knowing when he shows up that Japan is one of the places that are most outcasting to witch trials, aside from the other people who were also in England, wouldn't end well for him. This again is where the jacket comes into play. I like the idea of him having this sort of cover up on top as if he's sort of visually repressing himself, having this cover up be what he is trying to hide. But with the colour being so bright and overpowering to the rest of his design, he quite literally won't be able to hide who he is. It is blaring, it is right there, but also while having his outfit visually tell that he is in a different place, he is a traveller, he needs this jacket because to him this is sort of his safety blanket, this large shape over the top of him hiding his frame. He literally is hiding himself away. He sees this as his safety, and to him that's the most important thing ever. For my other design, it really didn't go the way I thought it would in my head, and I didn't know how to fix it, so I kind of left it how it is. And the way it is now is really boring and doesn't have much thought into it, aside from it being very English leaning and only having subtle Japanese accents to it, which is quite literally the opposite of what I wanted to do. So I didn't go for that one, and I pretty much just scrapped it as soon as I finished making it because I just really didn't like it. And finally we get to the last few details, such as Hizashi's belt, which I originally gave him for things like seeds, as he used to be a farmer, and I'm assuming that in this rewrite he would also be a farmer again. However, he'd be a farmer for the safe haven witches, assuming that a lot of these people came from very diverse and different backgrounds themselves. They would need somebody there to help tend to the crops and help grow these amounts of food they'd need all of a sudden because there are so many of them seeking shelter. And obviously the one I chose to continue with is the third one, the one with the jacket, which will then be going up on to the character spec sheet, which I will reference from later. Now onto the ritual outfit. This one I was so incredibly excited for, having multiple iterations of this design, just going absolutely crazy in my mind, and it turned out the best for me in terms of silhouette, as it was really interesting and intriguing to look at. A lot of my references pulled from these types of samurai outfits, as well as these different patterning elements that I loved. The one I am going to choose for this is my fourth one, as I believe it embodies Hizashi's progress up until now the most. The first design in this set of silhouettes doesn't capture what I want, having nods to being royalty in it with Henry VIII style and Tudor style shorts, as well as having this chain around his neck, which mimics the chains in the Devil Tarot card. It is a good idea to play with, and maybe I could have explored this further. However, through progressing on to my second design, I realised I could lean more into his culture. Having been in Japan, Hizashi would have had experiences with samurai and military enforcements in general. The samurai probably would have come to collect money that he owes for the land, or he's seen his father deal with them before. So this is important that I add this sort of step into power that Hizashi suddenly has by being near Toko, who has all this immense authority over everybody. He has gained his power in some corrupt way that he shouldn't have. Through the ritual, he has become the way he has, which is much like an initiation, say, into an army or into a cult or anything along the lines. This could also be a representation of how Toko sees Hizashi. Throughout the story, Hizashi is constantly rebelling and fighting against everything. Samurai were known to fight, so maybe this is Toko's stance on how she views Hizashi as a person, seeing him as somebody who constantly fights her every step of the way while she's trying to complete her goal. His silhouette also leans more into the devil aspect, having multiple horns and sharp edges, much like most visual images of the devil. I believe this can also be really well translated onto his final resurrected design. Now moving on to Hizashi's resurrected form. This is where I had the most trouble ever with coming up with designs or silhouettes. See, the thing is, beforehand, I have never in my life drawn characters in this way by doing a sort of blob of a silhouette first in just a large dip pen on ibis paint and erasing the features to what I would like to keep. This to me was really strange and was not something I would like to do again. But for the sake of this project, I at least wanted to try it, as it's a well-known technique that concept artists use to create lots of different visuals really quickly. The middle design was the only real design I could get behind. I did attempt to create two others at this point, however, they weren't looking quite right, and the one that I was drawn to the most was the middle design. I played around a little bit with the different shapes of the horns and even tempted to create new outfits for Hizashi's final form. However, these weren't looking right at all. So I just went with what felt the most right to me, which was the middle one, as I could add previous elements from the past two designs once those were finished onto his final look to make it a bit more cohesive. Now that the spec sheet is done with the generalized version of what I want to create, I will now go back into my PowerPoint and finish off what I have started to create.